I remember the day everything changed. My name is Mike, and I've been married to Laura for over 8 years. We met in college, both young and ambitious, and our life together seemed perfect. We had a lovely home in the suburbs of Phoenix, a vibrant 6-year-old son named Ethan, and a comfortable routine that revolved around family dinners, soccer practice, and movie nights. But recently, things felt off. At first, it was subtle. Laura started coming home late from her book club, which quickly morphed into work meetings with her colleagues. I brushed it off as her being busy. After all, she was climbing the corporate ladder at her marketing firm. I wanted to support her ambitions, but there was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Little things began to add up: the change in her schedule, the way she would quickly shut her phone when I walked into the room, and the time she spent working out at the gym without telling me. It was almost as if she was living a double life. My friends would reassure me that I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I sensed something was. One late afternoon, I got an unexpected call from Ethan's soccer coach, Dan. Dan was a charismatic guy, always joking with the kids and pushing them to do their best. He mentioned that he couldn't help but notice how Laura had been supporting the team lately, attending practices more than usual. My gut dropped. Why was she spending so much time at soccer practice? I chalked it up to parents being involved, but it felt unsettling. As the days went by, I decided to do a little digging. I noticed Laura's phone was buzzing more often, and I couldn't help myself. Curiosity got the better of me. One night when she fell asleep on the couch, I took a chance and picked up her phone. I felt like a criminal, but I had to know. I unlocked it using the same code she had set for years. What I found made my heart race and my blood boil. Messages exchanged between Laura and Dan were explicit. They were planning secret meetings, filled with flirty emojis and inside jokes that made it clear their relationship had crossed the line. I couldn't breathe. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. This was not just a fleeting moment of weakness, this was a full-blown affair. My mind raced with disbelief. This was the woman I had trusted, the mother of my child, and she was cheating on me with my son's coach. The shock was overwhelming. I felt sick to my stomach as I read through the messages, realizing how many times I had been played for a fool. The pain turned to anger, and that anger ignited a fire in me. I decided I couldn't let this go unanswered. I was going to confront her, but not before I made sure I had all my ducks in a row. So I devised a plan. I wanted to know how deep this went and gather as much evidence as I could. I started keeping an eye on their interactions during soccer practice. I would watch them from the sidelines, the way they laughed together and exchanged knowing glances. It was infuriating. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and a twisted sense of betrayal that I had never experienced before. Finally, the day came for confrontation. I had everything I needed to lay it all out on the table. In that moment, I felt a surge of determination. I was ready to confront Laura, to expose the lies she had spun, and ensure that Dan faced the consequences of his actions. This was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and standing up for what was right. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to unfold. How would she react? Would she deny it? Would she beg for forgiveness? I was ready for anything, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let her get away with this. To be continued. The moment arrived when I knew I had to confront Laura. It was a Tuesday evening, and she had returned home late from work. I could sense the tension in the air as I watched her slip off her shoes and head directly to the kitchen, avoiding eye contact. I sat at the dining table, heart pounding, with the evidence of her betrayal burning a hole in my pocket. "Laura, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. She looked up, a hint of annoyance in eyes, as if I were interrupting her evening routine. "Can it wait? I'm really tired," she replied dismissively. That only fueled my resolve. "No, it can't wait. This is important." I stood up, taking a few steps towards her. "I know about you and Dan." Her expression changed instantly. The annoyance morphed into confusion and then into something akin to fear. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but I could see the flicker of guilt flashing across her face, confirming my worst suspicions. I pulled out my phone, displaying the messages I had screenshotted. I have proof, Laura. You can't lie your way out of this one. Her face turned pale as she glanced at the screen. Mike, I can explain. She blurted, her tone turning defensive. It's not what you think. Not what I think. You were planning secret meetings with him, Laura. How long has this been going on? My voice rose as the betrayal washed over me again, fresh and raw. Please, just let me explain. It was a mistake. We were just being friendly. You've been so busy with work and Ethan's soccer, I felt lonely. She rambled, her excuses falling flat. Lonely, so you decided to fuck your son's coach. That makes perfect sense. I shot back, my patience wearing thin. I could feel a mixture of rage and hurt boiling inside me, and I struggled to contain it. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was just one time, and I regret it, she said, her voice rising in desperation. You have to believe me. Believe you after everything. How am I supposed to trust anything you say? You've lied to me for months. My heart felt like it was shattering into pieces. Laura's facade began to crack, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. I can't lose you. I love you, Mike. It was a mistake, please. Love, if you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses. My emotions were a whirlwind, and I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disgust all at once. I needed to stand my ground. Maybe I should have seen this coming. You've acted distant lately. I thought you were just busy, but now I see it was more than that. I was starting to lose my grip on the situation, my heart racing with a sense of betrayal that made it hard to breathe. I want to fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Her voice was pleading, but I could tell she was desperate and unsure. Work through this with the guy who's supposed to be coaching our son. I shook my head in disbelief. What do you think that would do to Ethan? Do you care at all about how this will affect him? Laura fell silent, and I could see the weight of her actions crashing down on her. She had no response. The reality of her choices hung thick in the air between us, and the tears streaming down her face did nothing to soften the blow of her betrayal. I don't know if I can forgive you, Laura, I finally said, my voice calmer but still heavy with hurt. You've shattered everything we built together, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She took a step towards me, reaching out, but I recoiled instinctively. Don't touch me, I said, the words harsher than I intended. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. In that moment, I felt a surge of clarity in the chaos. I knew I couldn't let this go unanswered. I wouldn't let Dan get away with this either. The anger that had boiled over during our confrontation turned into a plan. I had to think strategically about how to handle the situation, not just for my sake, but for Ethan's future too. As Laura stood there, crying and pleading for forgiveness, I felt a numbness wash over me. I was angry, yes, but I was also heartbroken, and I knew I had to take action. This wasn't just about revenge. I needed to ensure that she and Dan faced the consequences of their actions, and I was going to do it in a way that made sure they both understood the gravity of what they had done. To be continued. After that explosive confrontation, things spiraled quickly in our household. Laura spent her days filled with a mix of desperation and anger, constantly trying to convince me that she made a mistake and that we could fix our marriage. I, on the other hand, was wrestling with my own feelings of betrayal and resentment. I had lost faith, not just in her but in the life we had built together. I spent sleepless nights thinking about how I could bring Dan down. It wasn't just about punishing Laura. It was about making sure Dan lost everything he'd taken from me. I started digging deeper into his background, looking for anything that could serve as leverage against him. It felt like I was playing a game, and I was determined to win. I quickly learned that Dan had been coaching for several years in the local youth soccer league. He was well liked by the kids and their parents, and his reputation was solid. But I also discovered something that made my heart race. He had a history of inappropriate behavior with other parents. Nothing had been reported formally, but whispers floated around the soccer community about how he often crossed professional boundaries. Armed with this information, I decided to pay a visit to the local soccer association. I spoke with the president, a man named Tom, about Dan's coaching record. I presented myself as a concerned parent who had heard troubling rumors about Dan's behavior. I could see the wheels turning in Tom's head as I spoke. What kind of inappropriate behavior are you talking about? He asked. leaning forward, clearly intrigued. I mentioned the whispers regarding how Dan interacted with the mothers on the team, his flirty texts that seemed to cross the line of professionalism, and how he had been spotted leaving bars late at night with the same parents. I didn't go into specifics about Laura yet. I wanted to gather more evidence before diving into that territory. Tom's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "I'll need to look into this. We take these allegations seriously," he said, nodding. "If you have any proof, that would help." I knew the ball was rolling, and I was ready to play my hand. I began gathering any and all evidence I could find, including screenshots of texts and images of Dan with other mothers that I found online. I wanted to ensure that Dan's career took a hit, and it felt oddly satisfying to know I was working towards that goal. Meanwhile, Laura was desperate to salvage our relationship. She would call me at work, trying to soften my heart, with sweet nothings and promises of change. "I'll do anything, Mike. I just want us to be a family again," she pleaded. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of guilt at her distress, but the anger and betrayal were stronger. One evening, as I was sifting through more information about Dan, I received a text from Laura asking if we could talk. "I think I know what I did was wrong, and I want to make amends," she wrote. My fingers hovered over my phone as I contemplated my response. I wanted to tell her that words meant nothing, that promises were hollow. Instead, I said, "We can talk, but it's going to be different from before." She agreed to meet at a cafe later that week, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I prepared myself for another round of her excuses and pleas for forgiveness, but deep down, I was also gathering my strength to cut the ties that had bound us for so long. The day of our meeting arrived, and I sat at a corner table, watching as she approached with a look of determination framed by her usual charm. I felt an odd mix of anticipation and dread. Could I really confront her again? Could she even begin to understand the depth of my hurt? "Hey," she said softly, sitting down across from me. "I'm really sorry, Mike. I know I've messed up, but I want to make things right." I had rehearsed my response, but as I looked into her pleading eyes, the rehearsed words felt inadequate. "Laura, you've shattered my trust. You cheated on me with Ethan's coach. This isn't something you just apologize for and everything goes back to normal." I know," she said, her voice cracking. "But I want to show you I can change. I've been going to therapy and I'm committed to making things better." "Therapy for you or for us?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "For me, but I want to work on us too. I want our family back." I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the wave of sympathy blooming in my heart. I knew I had to remain focused on my plan. "You need to understand that I won't just forget. I've already started making arrangements." Her expression shifted, a flicker of panic sparking in her eyes. "What do you mean? What arrangements?" "I'm doing what I need to do for myself, Laura. I'm not going to be the one who gets hurt here." I could see the reality of her situation settling in, and I felt a twisted sense of power as I prepared for the next phase of my plan. I wasn't going to let Dan get away with his betrayal, and I knew the soccer community would want to hear what I had to say. As I prepared to set my plan into motion, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I was ready for whatever came next, ready to ensure that justice was served. To be continued. After that tense meeting at the cafe, I returned home feeling a mix of confusion and resolve. Laura was desperately trying to mend what had been broken, but I knew I couldn't just turn back the clock. Too much had happened and the wounds were still fresh. But as I prepared to execute my revenge on Dan, I felt a sense of purpose that overshadowed my personal turmoil. The next day, I decided to visit the soccer association again. I didn't want to waste any time. I needed to make my case more compelling. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, screenshots of flirtatious texts, messages that hinted at more than just a friendly relationship, and even testimonies from other concerned parents who had noticed Dan's inappropriate behavior. I wanted to ensure that, when I presented my findings, there would be no room for doubt. I arrived at the association to find Tom sitting at his desk looking pensive. As I walked in, he looked up and motioned for me to take a seat. "Thanks for coming back, Mike. I've been looking into your claims," he said, his brow furrowed. "Have you found anything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's just say there are some concerns about Dan's conduct with parents. I've spoken to a few others who have noticed some questionable behavior, he replied, leaning back in his chair. But it's one thing to hear rumors and another to have concrete evidence. I handed him the folder I had prepared, filled with screenshots and notes detailing everything I had uncovered. This is what I have, Tom. I think it's enough to warrant an investigation. He took the folder and began flipping through the contents. I watched as his expression changed from curiosity to shock, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Wow, this is more than I expected, he finally said, looking up at me. If this is true, it could really damage Dan's reputation and career. Exactly. And I don't want to see him coaching anymore, especially knowing what he's done with my wife, I replied, the bitterness creeping into my voice. He shouldn't be around kids, not with this kind of behavior. Tom nodded, his expression serious. I'll need to discuss this with the board and decide how to proceed, but I can't make any promises. I understand, I said, my heart racing with a mix of hope and anticipation. I just want to make sure he faces the consequences of his actions. After the meeting, I felt a sense of satisfaction washing over me. I was finally taking control of the situation. I knew I wouldn't just be a victim of Laura's infidelity. I was going to stand up for myself and make sure Dan felt the repercussions of his betrayal. Back at home, Laura was still trying to work her way back into my good graces. She was texting me throughout the day, asking if we could talk and how she was willing to change. I could hear the desperation in her words, but part of me felt nothing but cold indifference. That weekend, we had plans to take Ethan to his soccer game, something that had once been a family tradition. I found myself dreading the thought of seeing Dan there, coaching the team, while I had to pretend everything was fine. But I was determined to confront him, to let him know I was aware of his actions. As we arrived at the field, I spotted Dan on the sideline, laughing with the kids and their parents. The sight of him made my blood boil. I could see Laura getting excited, completely oblivious to the brewing storm behind the scenes. During the game, I took a few moments to watch Dan interact with Ethan and the other kids. He was charming, always encouraging, but I could see the way he looked at the mothers on the sidelines, too familiar, too flirtatious. I wondered how many had fallen for his charisma and how many had been affected by his actions. After the game, I couldn't hold back any longer. I approached him while Laura chatted with some other parents. Dan, I said, my voice low but firm. He turned to me, a smile on his face that quickly faded at the sight of my expression. Hey Mike, great game today, right? Cut the crap, we need to talk, I said, my anger simmering just below the surface. About what? He asked, feigning innocence, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. You know what I'm talking about. You think it's okay to mess around with my wife. I shot back, the words spilling out before I could rein them in. His demeanor shifted instantly, the casual facade dropping. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but I could see the guilt creeping into his expression. Save it, I've seen the texts. You're done coaching, Dan. I'm going to make sure of it. His eyes widened in disbelief. You wouldn't do that. You're just angry. This isn't how you want to handle this. Oh, I'm just getting started, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. You think you can just play with people's lives and get away with it? Not anymore. I turned to leave, feeling a rush of adrenaline as I walked back toward Laura. I could hear Dan's voice behind me trying to call me back, but I didn't stop. I had laid down the gauntlet and I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. Laura caught up with me, concern etched on her face. What happened? You looked angry. Let's just say Dan knows I'm not going to let him get away with this, I said, my resolve hardening. I knew that my plan was in motion and I wouldn't stop until justice was served. I felt a sense of satisfaction in taking control of the situation and preparing for whatever came next. To be continued. The confrontation with Dan left me with a surge of adrenaline, but it also opened the floodgates to a whirlwind of emotions. I felt empowered, but that empowerment was mixed with the lingering pain of betrayal. As the days passed, I continued to gather evidence and prepare for the fallout that would inevitably come from my actions. The following week, I followed up with Tom at the soccer association. I wanted to ensure the wheels were turning on my complaint against Dan. When I arrived, I found Tom in his office, poring over the materials I had provided. "We're taking this very seriously, Mike," Tom said, his tone grave. "I've spoken to a few other parents, and they've expressed similar concerns. I think we have enough to approach Dan about his behavior." "Good. I want him out of there. He doesn't deserve to coach after what he's done," I replied, my fists clenching at the thought of Dan still being near Ethan and the other kids. "Just be aware that these conversations can be sensitive. It's important we handle this carefully to avoid any backlash," Tom warned. I nodded, understanding the need for caution but feeling my blood boil at the idea of Dan continuing to manipulate and charm parents at the soccer field. "I get that, but he needs to understand the consequences of his actions. I won't let him continue to hurt others." As we discussed the next steps, I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that Dan's world was about to come crashing down. My anger and hurt had been channeled into something constructive, and it felt good to take back control of my life. Back at home, Laura continued to try and mend our fractured relationship. She was making dinner, asking about my day, and even expressing interest in family therapy. I could see how hard she was trying, but I remained guarded. The wound was still fresh, and I couldn't forget the betrayal so easily. One evening over dinner, Laura looked at me with a mix of hope and fear. "Mike, I know I messed up, but I'm committed to making this work. I love you, and I want to prove that I can be the wife you deserve." I stared at her, feeling a mix of pity and frustration. "You say that now, Laura, but what about the trust? You broke that when you chose to be with Dan. I don't know if I can ever get that back." "I understand," she said softly, her eyes pleading. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you I can change. I just need a chance." "Change takes time, and I'm not sure I'm ready to give you that chance yet," I replied, feeling like I was walking a tightrope between anger and the remnants of love I still felt for her. As the days turned into weeks, tension hung heavily in the air, thickening the atmosphere in our home. I was focused on the impending confrontation with Dan and the soccer association, while Laura continued to bombard me with attempts to reconnect. Sometimes I felt guilty for pushing her away, but I knew I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. Finally, the day arrived when Tom called me with news. "Mike, we've scheduled a meeting with Dan to discuss the allegations," he said, his seriousness evident. "I think it's going to be a tough conversation, but we need to make it clear that his behavior is unacceptable." I felt a rush of satisfaction. "I'm ready. Let's do this." The meeting was set for Saturday morning, and I couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation mixed with anxiety. I wanted to be there, not just for my sake, but for all the other parents who may have been affected by Dan's predatory behavior. When the day arrived, I showed up at the soccer association with a knot in my stomach. Tom was already in the conference room with Dan, who appeared uncharacteristically subdued. I felt a surge of power seeing him in such a vulnerable position. "Thank you for coming, Mike," Tom said as I entered. "I think it's best if we get right into it." Dan sat with his arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. "What's this about?" he asked, attempting to put on a facade of indifference. Tom cleared his throat, pulling out the evidence I had provided. "Dan, we've received serious allegations regarding your conduct with parents, including inappropriate messages and behavior that crosses professional boundaries." I watched as the color drained from Dan's face, and he shifted in his seat. "This is ridiculous. I'm a good coach. I haven't done anything wrong." "Then why do we have these messages?" Tom replied, sliding the screenshots across the table towards him. "These do not reflect the behavior expected from someone in your position." Dan glanced at the messages, his expression shifting from defiance to panic. "This is all a misunderstanding. Those were taken out of context," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. "It doesn't look that way," I interjected, my voice steady even as I felt the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "You've used your position to exploit vulnerable parents. This isn't just a misunderstanding, it's a pattern of behavior that needs to stop." Tom nodded. "We take these allegations seriously. If these behaviors continue, we will have no choice but to terminate your coaching position." "You can't do this," Dan shouted, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I'll fight this. You're ruining my life." Your choices have consequences, Dan, I said, feeling a sense of vindication wash over me. You made those choices and now you have to deal with them. The meeting continued and Dan's facade crumbled further as he tried to argue his way out of the situation. But I knew it was futile. The evidence was overwhelming and the truth was finally coming to light. As the meeting concluded, Tom informed Dan that the board would deliberate over the evidence and provide a decision within a week. I felt a rush of satisfaction knowing that my actions had set this in motion. Dan was facing the consequences of his betrayal, and it was a small victory in the battle I had been fighting since I discovered Laura's infidelity. Walking out of the association, I felt a sense of relief mixed with lingering pain. I still had to face Laura and the mess our lives had become. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I felt stronger, more empowered than I had in a long time. To be continued. The following days felt like a surreal whirlwind. I had confronted Dan, laid out the evidence, and watched as the walls closed in around him. But even as I felt a sense of victory, the reality of my relationship with Laura hung heavily in the air. I was torn between the satisfaction of taking control and the undeniable pain of her betrayal. After the meeting at the soccer association, I returned home to find Laura waiting for me, anxiety etched across her face. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It went as expected," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Dan is facing serious consequences for his actions." Her eyes widened with a mix of relief and fear. "Do you think he'll be fired?" I nodded, trying to gauge my emotions. "It's likely. He won't be coaching again if the board decides to take this seriously." Laura looked down, her expression shifting from relief to guilt. "I can't believe this is happening. I never wanted it to come to this." I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "But it did, Laura. You made choices that hurt us, hurt me and Ethan. I don't know if I can ever forgive you." "I know," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I messed up, but I want to change. I want to prove to you that I can be a better person." Her desperation tugged at my heartstrings, and part of me felt a flicker of sympathy. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered, was resolute. "Change takes time, and I don't know if I'm ready to give you that time or that trust," I said, feeling the weight of my words. Over the next few days, the tension in our home was palpable. Laura made efforts to show that she wanted to rebuild our marriage, attending therapy sessions, cooking meals, and spending time with Ethan. But every time I looked at her, I was reminded of the betrayal, of the intimacy she had shared with Dan. Finally, the soccer association's board made their decision public. Dan was officially terminated from his position as coach. I felt a surge of satisfaction when I received the news. I had taken action, and justice had been served. But the victory felt hollow in my heart, overshadowed by the chaos in my personal life. That evening, I sat down with Laura in the living room, wanting to clear the air before we moved forward. "We need to talk," I said, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. She nodded, her expression serious. "I know things have been tense. I want to hear what you have to say. I need you to understand that this isn't going to be easy. You've hurt me deeply, Laura. I don't know if I can continue to be in a relationship with someone who betrayed my trust so completely," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I get that," she replied, her eyes glistening with tears. "But I want to prove to you that I can be better. I want to fix this. Fixing it is going to take more than words, Laura. It's going to take time, and I don't know if I can wait or if I even want to," I said, trying to remain open but firm. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mike. I want to rebuild our family. I want to show you that I can be the wife you deserve," she pleaded. As I looked into her eyes, I saw a mixture of desperation and sincerity. I realized that while she may want to change, it would take more than just her willingness to do so. Trust had to be rebuilt, and for that, I needed time to process everything. "I think it's best if we take a step back for now," I said, feeling a sense of finality in my voice. "I need space to figure out what I want. I don't want to keep dragging this out while I'm still so angry." Laura's face fell, and for a moment I felt the weight of her disappointment bearing down on me, but deep down I knew this was the right decision. I had to prioritize my well-being and my son's. "I understand," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I just hope one day you can forgive me." I nodded, feeling the sting of tears in my own eyes. "I hope so too, but it's going to take time. As I sat in the silence that followed, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. While the road ahead was uncertain, I realized that I was finally taking the reins of my life. I wouldn't be a victim anymore. I was ready to move forward, whether that meant rebuilding my marriage or ultimately letting it go. In the aftermath of everything, I learned the importance of self-respect and the value of standing up for myself. Betrayal can shatter trust, but it can also ignite a fire within you. I knew I could emerge from this stronger, more resolute, and ready to embrace whatever came next. As I reflected on this chapter of my life, I understood the lessons learned. Life could take unexpected turns, and sometimes the hardest battles were fought within ourselves. Moving forward meant prioritizing my happiness and reclaiming my life, regardless of what the future held. And as I looked at the uncertain horizon, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I was ready to embrace the next chapter, whatever it may bring.